Today we're going to be talking about the function in Google Scripts that's used to send survey requests over to Twilio. In other words, if we want to begin a survey with a participant, then we need to send a survey request to Twilio. This function is going to allow you to automate that from your Google spreadsheets. I'm going to start by looking at a simple spreadsheet. We can see that we have numbers here. Each number is associated with a language. So if you have participants who speak different languages, you may be sending out different types of surveys. And we have this batches column. So we'll talk more about what we're doing when we're batching survey requests. There's some data here that we've recorded from those surveys as Twilio gives us a response to the request that we send over. So for now, for demonstration purposes, I'm just going to clear out the columns from that table so that we're starting fresh. Okay, so we have our new table. As we begin, the only thing we need to know about our participant is their contact number and the language. Over here, we're going to start looking at the function that we're going to use to send over these survey requests. The name of this function is Batch Survey Language Support. In this particular version of the function, we're supporting multiple languages. I'm going to walk through line by line and just briefly talk about what each part of the function is doing. First thing here is we have a simple logger that just lets us know that batch survey was called. Here we're setting these account IDs. So from your Twilio account, you have an account SID. You also have an account token. I've stored these in the Google Script properties so that they're private. You can access those by going to File, Project Properties, Script Properties, and entering in your own tokens. That way they're here for you and you won't have to re-enter them or expose them on your function. Okay, next we're just going to define some variables that we need to access the sheet. Sheet name, that's going to be the sheet name in the lower part of your sheet. So right over here, I've called mine survey numbers. You may call yours whatever you'd like, but you need to make sure that this name represents the name on the bottom part of your sheet. Batch size, that's the number of requests that you're going to send out over at a time. I've done 2 for this demonstration just so that it's a small batch, but you might want to do up to 20, up to 30, up to 50. And then language data flow. This is an object that we're getting from another function, get language flow data, and we'll talk through this in a moment. But this is going to give us the flow ID that we need to send over with our Twilio request. Down here, we're creating what's called an options object. This is something that we're also going to need to send over with our Twilio request to Twilio so that they can authenticate our request and begin the execution. Here, we're going to pull the data from the spreadsheet. So we're going to set the sheet, the total range data, and the values from this survey numbers. Next, we're going to get the starting row for the next batch. If we're just starting a new survey, then the starting row will be the first one. In the next video, we'll go into automating sending multiple batches, and we'll talk more about this piece of the function. We're also just going to get the number of columns in our table and the end row for our batch. The next piece of this function is iterating through the list of numbers that we have over here and just sending the request. First of all, we just want to validate that there is a number. In this video, we will be looking at triggers. In the next video, we'll talk more about what that trigger would do if you were automating sending all of your requests. Here, we're going to send the survey request over. We're going to add a couple items to our options payload, specifically the number from the sheet, and then also the flow ID from our language flow data. Here we're going to compose that URL that consists of the flow ID and then the executions path. And then here we're actually going to send that HTTP request to Twilio with that URL and the options. Again, the options includes our account information, and that's how Twilio will be able to validate our request. Here we're going to record the response that Twilio gives us and enter it into the table. So I'm just going to set the range, and then I'm going to gather the data, and then I will get the range from the spreadsheet, and then simply set the values. After we've completed looping through all of the numbers in our batches, we want to handle the end of the batch. This is another function, one of our helper functions, which you'll see are down below the primary batch survey language support function. So let's take a look at those helper functions. Here we have the get language flow. This is something that helps us organize all of the different flow IDs. Since each flow has to be associated with a different sending number, we'll also just enter in that unique sending number as well. You can continue this if you had more languages. Let's say, for example, I added a French survey. I would simply update that here as FR. I would change the flow ID to the appropriate flow ID, and then update my number with whatever the appropriate number was. I just want to make sure that whatever languages I have here are represented in my language column here. Next we have find next batch start. So if no next batch start is set, we're just going to simply set that to 1. Otherwise, we're going to go through this column, we're going to find the next batch start, and we're going to return that to our function. The next helper is the handle the end of batch. So if there is another number left in the sheet, then we will simply write next batch start into our table so that we know where to pick up on the next iteration. Otherwise, we will delete the triggers, something that we aren't creating in this video. This delete trigger will be called if we're automating all of our batch requests, but in this case, we won't worry about it. In the next video, we'll go more into how to work with triggers. These two functions are all about automating all of your batch surveys, and we'll talk about those more in the next video. Okay, let's go ahead and actually send this request. So here I am in my spreadsheet. I'm going to go data. I'm going to select, tools, macros, batch survey language support, and see what happens in my table. Okay, so I get the next batch start is here. My date that I sent it is over here, and I have some information back from Twilio about my execution. Now, if I were to send another request, if I were to fire that same function again, batch survey language support, I should get another batch sent over. Excellent. So now we can see that we have the next batch start, which is this last number. Let's just go ahead and send over one more request. Great, we get that last request sent over, we get the previous batch start, and we have no next batch start. If you're managing surveys in multiple languages, it can help to create some validation in the Google Sheets column, just so that you know that each participant's language is something that will be represented in the function. To add this validation, just highlight the rows that you want to validate, right-click, find Data Validation, and And here you just want to enter a list of all the languages that you support. This will just validate that everything in this column is one of these strings. You'll want to make sure that for each of these languages, you have an associated key in your language flow data object with the flow ID and a unique